Oh, there are many things to do at ISEG.
Yeah, you have
Time never
a
stops.
whole plan for that.
Yeah, I don't have a whole plan for that, but I hope I can contribute the whole time to positively.
I mean,
hope.
since when you were talking about the career path, it was always very spontaneous, right?
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Do you take that approach when managing ISEG?
When managing the school, I do have a plan, and I never forget what I think is essential and what I think is really important. So, but of course, unexpected things happen, like the pandemic, and having to make changes in your original plans, and you have to be flexible and agile in that sense. So, in my opinion, you need to be extremely decisive, not authoritative, because it doesn't work at all in a university. But you have to be the one who makes the decisions in the end. You listen to everyone and you make the decision. Right or wrong, in the end it was always the right decision because you did your best given the information you had at the time. So, but, I mean, you don't always do what you like and the way you like to do things. You have to compromise here and there, but I never lose track of my main objectives.
Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Crunch the Numbers, our podcast from Lisbon Investment Society about finance. I am your host, David Tita, and today we are joined by Professor Clara Raposo, Dean of ISEG, and I asked you that you join us to dive into finance. So starting off, Professor Clara, be most welcome to a place that is basically our home and yours for over...
It's beautiful and...
almost a decade now.
For more than a decade.
More than a decade. Incredible. And
Yes.
you've been Dean for 3 years now.
I've been Dean for a little over 3 years by now, so...
Just during the summer was the period?
It was like I swore in on the 6th of July.
That's
2018.
That you
so, I remember
forever.
that. I'll remember that date forever, okay? So I'll never forget that. My life changed a lot.
Can you walk us a little bit through your career path?
Okay. So I can tell you a little bit about what I've done. I've never left school, so that's something that's very special for quite a few academics. So in my case, I didn't really plan things, okay? So that's important to know. It's things that have happened to me, and my career has evolved based on the daily basis and on my performance in our daily routine. So I did a first degree in economics, not here at ISEG, at another school, and I was a good student, okay?
Well,
I was like,
of course.
no, I was a good student. Not that I studied a lot, but I always had things under control, more or less. So I didn't really choose anything, so I was invited to stay as a teaching assistant, and then decided to do a master's because it seemed natural for someone. At that time, it wasn't so obvious that we would do a master's immediately after the first degree. It was a 4-year bachelor's degree. So I decided to do a master's and to go abroad. So went to London, did a master's in economics at the University of London at Queen Mary College. And then during the master's, I decided to do a PhD. So it was all decided based on performance, like my professors of finance in the master's told me that he thought I should go for a PhD. So everything last minute. I decided all these things pretty much last minute. So I decided to do a PhD in finance at the London Business School. And that went well. 4 long years. It's a very lonely period in our lives to go through a doctoral program. And then at some point, I would have to choose a proper career. But after all that effort in academia, let's go for an academic career. And I really started my academic career as a professor in Oxford, at the University of Oxford. So I applied there when the business school was starting. So those were very interesting years. And then at some point, in a moment of, craziness, I felt homesick. I had been in England for 8 years, and it was becoming very permanent. So I decided to come back home. At the time, I came to a different school, not the same where I studied, not ISEG, another school. So I studied at Nova, then I came to ISCTE. At the time, lots of things were happening there with the creation of new master's program in finance and postgraduate degrees, etc. So I joined that group for a few years while it was still new and active and young and so on. And then it became boring and highly bureaucratic. And there was this job opening as a full professor here at ISEG, which I always thought would be the ideal place to end the academic career, like the traditional school, a lot of potential, beautifully located, lots of things to do to modernize the school in many ways. So that's what I did. So I came here as a professor of finance, did all sorts of things in finance here, in the master's and in the bachelor's and all that. And suddenly there were elections here at ISEG, and who would do it, who wouldn't do it. And some colleagues of ours asked me to consider doing that. First I laughed and I thought they're crazy, but then I took the challenge. Okay, so
Why did you take the challenge?
why did I take the challenge of becoming dean of ISEG? I guess for two reasons. First, it was a challenge, and I do take challenges. I never choose what's easy.
I mean, we can tell from your career path.
No, it's like, but even when I was studying, for example, I preferred macro versus micro, so I decided to study more micro. Finance wasn't really my favorite subject at the time. I found it hard and difficult. So let's do that to learn about what's difficult, etc., etc. Right. So I like institutions and organizations where there's things to be done and where probably you can make a difference. That was my impression. And here at school, it would be a new experience in management as well. So I've been an academic my whole life, making decisions every day, of course. But at some point, it would be something new and different that I could do in my career. And I actually thought that I was better positioned than the other potential candidates at the time, than that I could do something good for the school as well. So personal challenge, managerial role, and doing something good for the school. This is also the school where my father studied many years ago. So there's that special respect towards the institution.
So I can tell from personal perspective, at least, that your impact in the school has been absolutely astounding, for sure. Like, we've noticed the
for what's good and for what's bad, for the good and for the bad. We know.
An impact is an impact, for sure.
I know, there is an impact.
So you consider that for more than a decade, there was and still are things to do at ISEG?
Oh, there are many things to do at ISEG.
So you have
Time never
a
stops.
whole plan for that.
Yeah, I don't have a whole plan for that, but I hope I can contribute the whole time to positively.
I mean,
I hope.
Since when you were talking about the career path, it was always very spontaneous, right?
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Do you take that approach when managing ISEG?
When managing the school, I do have a plan, and I never forget what I think is essential and what I think is really important. So, but of course, unexpected things happen, like the pandemic, and having to make changes in your original plans, and you have to be flexible and agile in that sense. So, in my opinion, you need to be extremely decisive, not authoritative, because it doesn't work at all in a university. But you have to be the one who makes the decisions in the end. You listen to everyone and you make the decision. Right or wrong, in the end, it was always the right decision because you did your best given the information you had at the time. So, but, I mean, you don't always do what you like and the way you like to do things. You have to compromise here and there, but I never lose track of my main objectives. That's true. I never lose track of that. And sometimes I have to do other things that come in the way and that, become priorities because of the circumstances, but I never forget what I think is really most relevant for the school. And in the end, we have to think about the reputation of the school in the future and what will happen to the students that we have now and to the ones that we want to attract here for the coming years. So I never forget that, I think.
So, and I hope you don't mind, but I went to check your LinkedIn, of course.
Okay.
So, and you said you never left the academia, right?
Yeah.
But let me just check my notes.
I do a lot of things.
There are a lot of things you also do. You're a board member, a chairperson, and a member of a board of advisors at the same time as being Dean of ISEG.
Yeah,
so
true.
How can you manage that and still, radiate your characteristic positivity? How's it possible?
Okay. Well, let's see. Number one, I sleep very little. In general, that's true. I don't sleep a lot, so my 24 hours last for very long compared to most people that I deal with on a daily basis. So I'm a hard worker. Okay,
right.
So. And these other my main activity is obviously the school, and that's my only executive activity. So, so that's it's a full-time job, and I take it as a full-time job, definitely. And it doesn't end when I leave the school here. So at night there's more to do and to think about, and so there's a lot to be done. But there are other things that we also do it's inevitable that I have contact with companies, with financial institutions, with organizations that deal, for example, the one where I'm in the advisory board, with the sustainability issues and newer topics, more recent topics like that. And of course, we must contribute as well. It's important for me personally, for me professionally, to be aware of what's new, of what's happening, of what are the trends. It's also a way of influencing the actors in the market, and it's important for the school, in my opinion, that I am present in some of these organizations, because people invite me because of my CV, but also because I'm Dean of ISEG, and because that's a way of establishing a connection between the school and the practical world, which is very relevant for everyone else. So there's always a way of, I couldn't be doing this and being the CEO of a company, okay?
Right.
It would be impossible. But having a non-executive role in some of these organizations, I think, it has been possible so far.
So you've given your input to them. Do you feel like those positions have given an input to you and contributed to the development of the school?
Oh, absolutely. So it's important that whoever runs a school of economics and management understands how the business world works, for example. And so being an insider there as well helps us become, in my case, better researchers, better teachers, and better managers, I hope. At least I think that effect is there. And to me personally, it has enriched me, okay?
And that's a good word of the use of the word insider, because in finance, when we think of
insider trading, yeah, that's how you need to be aware, yeah. You know, but my first research area was actually on corporate governance and those issues and conflicts of interest, so I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that.
So as a master in finance student, I'm very pleased because once again, ISEG has made its mark on the Financial Times ranking as the 45th. I think, best masters in finance in the world.
Yeah, true.
So what does that mean to you, to me, and to the whole school?
I don't know what it means to you. I can
as
imagine.
A student in general.
Or to the whole school. But I think that to the school, it's great that we have a master's in finance that's in the top, in the list of best masters in the world in a topic that's so competitive and that all schools in the world invest in. So knowing that our masters in finance is top 35 in the world in the Financial Times rankings is amazing. For me, personally, I cried a lot when we achieved that 2 years ago. You cannot imagine. It's a dream come true in some ways, a professional dream come true in some ways, because I remember when I joined here the Masters in Finance, for example, it was fully taught still in Portuguese, which is okay for some masters, but to be ranked later and assessed for this, you would need to have a program with some different features. So what I see is the result of many changes introduced during these last few years, and by last I mean 10, I don't mean just 2 or 3 years, okay? So it's something that we have to think about and organize and prepare carefully. And the recognition of the effort of many of our faculty members who really are so dedicated to the program, right? So I attended the second year class of the seminar a couple of weeks ago, and I was so proud of my colleagues who were making that presentation and of all the extra elements that I have introduced in the program. So what I felt, professionally accomplished with the FT rankings for the Masters in Finance. I'm happy when something like that happens in the school at all levels for all programs. I'm just, extremely happy and ecstatic, and I don't know if I irradiate positivity, but I know that I'm extremely happy when I'm supposed to, and that I take it fully, okay, wholeheartedly. But in finance specifically, because it was the program I used to be the coordinator of, it was, extremely. So when I got the email message that morning for the first time when we entered the rankings, because it's unknown. Of course, I knew there were schools there with masters there that I knew are much worse than ours, and that their students are not as well prepared as ours. So I had the conviction that in terms of absolute value of the masters of the program, we should be there compared to other schools that were there. But you're never sure, right? It can be political. It can be the way in which people respond to those surveys. you never know. So, I can tell you, I cried like my whole family. They couldn't stand me anymore. It was bank holiday 2 years ago.
And I'm glad you mentioned the absolute value of the master, because it is a great program, and I talk with a lot of students from the other universities, and we can tell the difference in most cases.
Yeah.
But what about student positioning?
Okay.
Do you feel like students need to go to bigger or larger financial hubs like London or Frankfurt to get a better job or a better initial job than in Portugal?
Well, in some ways, perhaps, okay? Perhaps not so much the initial job. The initial job, getting acquainted with how financial institutions work, you can do that here, except that banks and so on haven't been recruiting so much in the last few years. First because of the financial crisis, then because of the sovereign crisis, then whatever. We know what's happening. So there aren't as many opportunities as we wanted, but so far we've had like full employment of our students. And the truth is that the market has become very global. So, and of course, in many ways, you will have more opportunities if you enlarge your horizons, because everyone is competing in that arena, right? So everyone's thinking globally and in finding a job that can take you anywhere, truly. So those financial centers, perhaps larger financial centers, will have a larger quantity, let's say, of interesting jobs in finance, whereas in a smaller market, like the Portuguese market and so on, you won't have so many people recruiting youngsters for something like this. But there is the potential to renew, and that I can see. And for example, even banks that currently are reducing staff and so on, at the same time, they are recruiting younger, more qualified people to strengthen their staff and to increase productivity in a way with more skilled, better qualified, clever people who
better masters.
So there are opportunities here. There are opportunities here for the future. Let's just see if the market in Portugal is prepared to pay better.
Right. That's always the
for
problem.
Starting positions, right? Otherwise, in many ways, the strong investment that the country and the schools make in educating very highly qualified young students who then become masters in finance, for example, then if they all leave, the investment that we are making at a country level, let's say, might not be sufficient. So we might not see the return of that so obviously. So there's perhaps something to be done regarding better conditions for younger people who start jobs, who start working in Portugal right now. So that's something that perhaps the authorities should consider in the future.
And are you confident that that will happen in the short term?
I don't know if it will happen in the short term, okay, given that we are recovering from this. Now it's the pandemic. We're always in a crisis in one way or the other. On the other hand, it's interesting, right? Life isn't simple. If it were, we wouldn't be needed anyway. So, but I guess like within the next 5 to 10 years, this thing has to be sorted, right? So something must be done. We come from a time when, you know, the level of qualification of the Portuguese professionals, of the population in Portugal was very low compared to anywhere else in Europe or, you know, or large cities in the US, for example. Still much better than some underdeveloped countries. I mean, we're always complaining about our country. It's great, okay? Our concern is whether we are able to continue this path, whether we are able to keep the right people here to make us more productive as well in some ways. So, but I see the opportunity there, I think.
By the way, following up on that, when we compare the education environment here in Portugal with the rest of the world, what do you feel are the largest benefits and flaws, you know, compared to students that study elsewhere?
Well, elsewhere can be many different parts of the world, right? So it's hard to generalize like that. I'd say the following. I'd say that in general, some people might not like this, but my impression is that in general, sometimes we leave people behind, okay, which is not nice in our educational system. But it's because in general it is demanding compared to to what you see in most other countries. So our high school system, if you complete all that, if you complete those 12 years of education fully, etc., you are very well prepared in general, okay, compared to everyone else. And our universities here at bachelor's level tend to be competitive when we look at European standards, for example. So typically a student who leaves ISEG completing the undergraduate degree and goes anywhere in the world or anywhere in Europe, let's say, so that it's a little bit more comparable, will find it reasonably easy and will be comfortable doing the master's degree, which is something that's of comfort to us, okay? So it is demanding, the quantitative areas are there, etc. Things that we don't do so much in Portugal and that in some other countries perhaps there is a tradition of doing it a bit more. Debating, formally debating and developing those skills with the students, okay? Making presentations, etc. But that's something that traditionally we didn't do, but these days we are doing more and more. Yeah. So what's important is that, in my opinion, we don't lose that traditional component that makes us strong, prepared to learn more in the future. I mean, no one will leave university knowing everything they will need to know their whole lives, right? But if you leave the school with a solid knowledge of the subject area in which you are starting to work, and you still keep your brain active and able to learn more and to adapt to new circumstances, you'll do very well. So that's really what I think. I mean, it's a demanding system, in my view. Perhaps we have the idea that our students in Portugal tend to be quieter in the rooms compared to other countries. So we still have the lectures, people watch the lectures, students don't always participate so much actively in those classes, but it has improved over the years. And the schooling system, and universities in particular, despite the pandemic period, are trying to give more space for students to develop their own activities, like you have with your Lisbon Investment Society and so on, and to organize your own things and to become more independent and autonomous as well. I mean, it can't be everything done now. Oh, the dean decided that now we're doing this. Of course not, right? I mean, you're adults, and that's the way you should be treated, and start developing your own initiatives.
I mean, we have so many associations here at ISEG. It's clear that the students want to do more, and that's really great to see.
Right, as long as and you should have the opportunity to develop those other skills, but in some ways it has to be natural as well, right? Yeah. You can't all be plastic, like, oh, now they're very good at presenting, and everyone makes the pitch in the same way, and everyone does this and that. At some point, you start losing spontaneity, and that's something that you cannot teach, but in a way, sometimes you end up, you can communicate that that thing of being yourself. It's not just something that you say to make it sound good, right? It's just something that at some point in your life, you can't live a lie your whole life. So, so developing those skills, allowing people to be a little bit more spontaneous here and there, that's something that perhaps needs to be improved in our educational system. But I find it competitive when I look at what happens to our students who continue their studies abroad or who start working elsewhere. They tend to do well, yeah. Quite a few of them.
And moving on to another topic, on a more personal note, I am very interested in working in two somewhat distinct areas, but in related to finance, investment banking and asset management. And I find when I scroll through LinkedIn on Portuguese students that are working in Portugal in those areas, the list is very thin.
It is.
So what do you think is my outlook here?
Yeah, in Portugal, there aren't so many interesting jobs like that at the moment, right? I'm sorry, there's always someone calling, I apologize. So there are some interesting jobs, and some larger banks or even international entities that have some offices in Portugal elsewhere or in Lisbon or in Porto. There are also sometimes good opportunities to be recruited and to spend some time abroad in these multinational organizations that will allow you to get more experience elsewhere. So that's something that you get even in Portuguese financial institutions. But your outlook, if you really want something that's extremely challenging and so on, in the short run, you probably want to consider something abroad. That's something that you must keep in mind. On the other hand, sometimes we have in our minds the idea that, I really want to work in investment banking or to be an asset manager and this and that. And okay, perhaps you want to do it for a few, perhaps you don't want to do it forever. And there are very interesting jobs in which someone with the right skills from finance will be able to contribute immensely in other types, in corporations, in other types of companies that really need someone who understands how to get the right financing for different types of strategies. A good financier is also a good manager, so there's everything in there. So you can think of, conducting a business, you don't need to be the CFO the whole life. You can,
I mean, that would be very stressful for once, my life expectancy would drop immediately if I chose to be investment banker or CFO for my whole life.
Yeah, it can be very stressful, right? I mean, there's a lot of pressure because, the markets are very volatile. It's part of the deal, right? We value things based on expectations.
Right.
And there's a little piece of news and you immediately revise your Excel, you change one, that's it, right? Yeah. You go to your file, you change one number and everything changes and all the values change and people trade and this and that. But on the other hand, it's active, it's interesting.
You mentioned that. Do you think the markets are efficient? And I know you're a professor of finance, you've been asked this question a lot of times.
In terms of finance, the market efficiency, the FAMA definitions.
Yeah, exactly.
Market efficiency. Yes, I think the markets are efficient.
Even considering, you talk about expectations, of course, we value a company based on the...
In terms of reflecting the information that exists.
Right.
Perhaps some people, I don't know if some people overreact in some ways or what justifies so much need for trading, right?
What if I value some information in a different way that you do?
Right. We will trade differently in some ways, and the price will reflect our average somehow, or our
and
best.
And is that average the fair value?
It's the best fair value. I mean, it's a bit subjective, isn't it? Right? Because we're not going to reach the same final valuation because this is not an exact science, right? And our valuation models tend to consider that, security, stock prices or any security, that they behave as if they followed some stochastic process or something like that. It's as if it's not reality. In reality, it's us trading that makes things evolve. So those are representations of reality, and it's not really true that anything follows a normal distribution or... Those are representations of reality. It's different. So, but from my experiences from trading or from observing people trading and so on, yes, I think that sometimes you might have some special circumstances, but in general, the prices you see there are meaningful. Okay, They do reflect the views of the participants in the market about those. Of course, we can disagree sometimes, right? But that's because we have different assumptions, and we consider different parameters.
It's not about insider trading, at least.
It's not. I don't think it's about insider trading so much. I think there's a lot of scrutiny these days. I mean, sometimes it can happen. Crime can always happen in whichever area of our lives. Okay, we can think of. But there's also a lot of scrutiny these days. So if something like that happens, there's hopefully punishment afterwards.
Okay, so you really believe that these days it's neglectable?
I think it's neglectable.
Okay.
Okay, I think there are other things that are more serious than that. I think so.
So, as a final note, you talked about a lot of stuff, and I think we're pushing our time. Could you just, for us students, could you tell us what you think are the most important characteristics to differentiate ourselves from our peers when we're competing in the job market? So what should we do? What traits should we develop?
Okay, when you are trying to find a new job or the first job or something like that. But, number one, this is not with a specific order of importance, okay? But number one, be confident about your personal portfolio, okay? Don't underestimate yourselves compared to others, right? So many schools in the world have this tradition of incentivizing in their students the culture of we're the best, whatever. That's not necessarily true, and no one is better than anyone else in every aspect.
Right.
So you need to identify your strengths, but be confident, okay? Trust what you've done, trust what you've studied, stick to what you've studied as a starting point, and that you have that solid knowledge, and be confident that what you know is not less than what the others you are competing against know. So at the same time, so go with confidence when you are being interviewed, when you discuss with people, say, okay, this is what I've done. This is, pretty good compared to what everyone else can do. I'm only 20-something, and this is already what I have to offer. Second important aspect that matters, be serious about your work, okay? When you work, this is going to be a serious moment in your life. So you better enjoy what you do, but working is not just, like going to the movies or to the beach.
Right,
working will have many days in which you feel a little bit lost, in which you are tired, etc. But be persistent there. Be serious about your work. Take it seriously. Adopt this professional attitude. There is a lot of discussion these days on what. One thing I hate when recruiters come to school or whatever is when they talk about, the kids, os miúdos, the kids, when we are recruiting the kids. What for kids? They're adults, right? So don't let people treat you as children. You're serious about your work and you are committed to that. Sometimes what recruiters say is difficult these days is that younger people who are starting their jobs, these new generations, the Z, this and that, they're not willing to make sacrifices in terms of, because you want to take time for your personal lives, for this and that. Of course, that's relevant, right? That you have a balanced life. But sometimes we must also understand that organizations require, in special moments, a little bit more of us. So better understand exactly what the deal is when you are being recruited and when you are starting a job. Be serious about what do you really need me to do and what are the perspectives, in the future, what can we do here? So just be serious about what you're doing. And act normal, right? Don't pretend to be someone else. That's the final recommendation that I would make. I mean, whoever recruits you and the CEO and whoever is there, and they're just, normal people. They've been through exactly the same process you're going through, and they're humans, and they still remember, okay?
Right.
They still remember. You don't need to be too shy. If you have doubts about things, just share your doubts with whoever is your boss or whoever you're working with. And your doubts can be as simple as something specific about the task that you're doing, something technical and so on. Share and ask, should I study this? Should I find more about this? Should I do that? But it can be something as, what should I wear? What should I do? Is this like the right behavior? Should I prepare especially? Just ask. Ask, don't be shy about that. Just ask and be kind to people. If you're being kind to people is also something that will reward you in the long run. Makes a difference.
Right.
Makes a difference. Look people in the eye. There are many schools I know of and that I've been to and that I visit and so on, in which it's very hard to establish eye contact, proper eye contact with their students, right? That's one advantage that you have here at school.
Right.
Most of our students, when you talk to someone that you meet everywhere, you're used to talking to older adults as well, like it or not, like it or not. And that's something that there's that extra element there.
So if you had to say that you're recruiting for some reason, and you had to say one characteristic, point out one characteristic in the candidate that is the most important for you to look for, what would it be?
Okay, so it depends on the kind of job you're looking for, okay? So it's not the same recruiting for asset management or recruiting for the communications or HR in a company. You might be looking for different characteristics. So the academic curriculum is very important, right? Especially in starting stages of someone's career. You want certification that that person really did well what they did before. So you look into that and you look at the quality of the institution that person came from, right? If you're coming from ISEG, I'm just using this example, of course, then you know, it's credible and so on. And even for international jobs, the fact that you put in your CV, Financial Times, Masters in Finance, whatever, that's of benefit to you in a Masters in Finance or from any other degree here at school. It's something that everyone should include in their CVs because there's like international standards that are, seen by everyone. It's hard to recruit based on that, but if you feel like when you are interviewing someone and you go through the tests and so on, so you might see how people work or discuss things with colleagues in a group. that might be relevant for some jobs. If you are interviewing or discussing something with someone and you think you can trust that person.
All right, so the gut feeling is also very important.
The gut feeling on can I trust this person to do this, right? If you are trustworthy, so it's this measure. So if you're looking for a job in finance, everyone will tell you that integrity will be characteristic number one because of the bad media that the finance area got for many years. But if you seem to be trustworthy, besides the academic ability, right? If you're trustworthy, that's the way to go.
So
trust someone.
In general speaking,
I think that in a way you
one.
want someone that you trust will do it, that you trust will accomplish what your common objectives, right? Okay. Yeah, there's no sharing without trust.
Right.
And if you're joining an organization, that's part of the deal.
It makes all the difference.
Yeah,
of course.
I think
so. I think that's a good note to finish our conversation.
Absolutely.
I'm just left with appreciating for you taking your time off your busy schedule. I know you have a lot of stuff to do, and I'm very pleased that you came over and talked with us.
Great pleasure to be with students here at ISEG, and Liz in particular. I remember from when this club started and so on. So delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Clara. And thank you to our listeners for, again, tuning in. And I hope you check this episode in full. And, of course, our other episodes available on Spotify and YouTube. Thank you.